Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Horses Advocate podcast. Today, I'm going to do a little reading from the Horse magazine from August 2022. There are so many good things in here. The thrust of the magazine is on equine microbiota by body system, which I think is just pretty interesting. But unfortunately, I'm not going to go over that right now. And the reason for that is this month, August and September, have been tumultuous at best. It's just been chaotic, and a lot of things have happened personally and business-wise that have delayed this podcast by a little bit. So I apologize, and I beg your forgiveness. Rather, I'm going to make this somewhat short. I'm obviously charging my car as I head off to some more horse calls. I wanted to go over one or two of these articles that are in here. The first one called Keeping Your Horse Hydrated, and it's sponsored by Purina. And I'm going to read this to you because a lot of people out there don't have the time to read their magazines. And it's kind of fleshed out. I don't know if you're watching video, but if you are, it's not a real article. It's kind of just it's in the centerfold, so you can rip it out. They say, pull it out, laminate it, put it in your barn for easy reference. But I want to talk about keeping your horse hydrated and how interesting this is, because hydration is very important. Everyone knows that you should be drinking a lot of water to stay hydrated, especially in the summertime. But I find that the biggest hydration problem occurs in November in the northern latitudes, where it gets cooler and you just don't get as thirsty. And yet your processes that go on at the cell level are still occurring and still require water. Remember, water is made up of two gases, hydrogen and oxygen. And those two gases, when combined together with two hydrogens and one oxygen at room temperature, makes a liquid. If it gets too hot, it becomes gas. And if it gets too cold, it freezes and becomes a solid. It's pretty interesting. And one other thing that's interesting about water is that they have a new type of water called easy water, E, and then the letter Z, water. And that denotes exclusion zone water, which is a water that they found inside the cells, particularly inside the mitochondria, specifically inside the electron transport chain, which is necessary. It's a form of water that is unique to being in that location, that helps the processes of converting fuel into energy. I find it fascinating. There's more to learn about exclusion zone water or easy water. And can it be manufactured? I think some people are trying to manufacture it. But without water, we die. Water is so essential. I know that without air, we die. If we're not allowed to breathe in anything, we'll die within minutes. But food, we can go for a year. If you're extremely obese, you can go for days to months. If you're not so obese, but you have extra body fat. And if you are anywhere fatter or not, you need water. Interestingly, the blubber of aquatic animals, such as whales, they've determined that it is the conversion of fat into fuel coming out of fat stores that releases water, and that's how these aquatic animals drink. They eat their food, get fat, and then the fat turns into water. Because remember, all fat is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and all sugar is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So as you eat these two food groups and you convert that into energy, you'll blow off H2O and create water. And that's how a lot of these aquatic mammals, that's how aquatic mammals drink water. They don't filter the salt out. They just convert their body fat into water. Also, there are, I guess, formulas that people have come together to determine how much water a person should drink. And that's one of the first things they talk about here. They said an idle horse needs approximately 5 liters of water per 100 kilos of body weight. That converts into 1,100-pound horse or 25 liters or 6.6 gallons per day. Now, that's a lot of water. If a gallon of water equals 8 pounds, that's like about 50 pounds of water, give or take, that they're drinking in. And remember, glycogen is a storage of glucose in our muscles as well as our liver, and that also incorporates the use of water. So as you start to use up glycogen, that's releasing some water, and that's why people say, well, when you exercise, you lose some body glycogen and you lose weight. Everyone says, well, that's water weight, and that's what they mean. Anyway, the article continues to say this amount can increase with exercise and warm temperatures. It also goes up in winter when dry hay replaces moisture-rich grass. I have to agree with that, with one addition. It's the temperature. As the temperature goes down, you're just not as thirsty. You'll notice this too. And it depends on where you live in this world. I'll just pick October, November in New York, for instance, or Northern Europe, or anywhere in that latitude, or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, of course, we're talking about April and May. But the point is, as the temperatures drop, the desire to drink decreases because you're not sweating as much. And it can actually go beyond what's normal and get you into dehydrated state. I've seen this a lot. Horses will colic in the early fall, just before it turns winter. Like the temperatures get down to close to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. And the horses will just stop drinking. Then they get impaction colics. So you have to be on alert for that, and you have to know how to hydrate them. So let me read more. It says water is a crucial nutrient for digestion and thermal regulation. Well, that's pretty straightforward. We all know that water is incorporated into the fats and into the sugars that we eat. And the processes that break it down require water in the chemical formulations. And if you don't have water, the chemical processes stop. The blood flow stops. The protein formulations or creations of proteins that make everything work in us stops. So it's really important. And as far as thermal regulation, I think that's interesting. It doesn't mean hot coffee in the cold. It just means that if you don't have blood flow, if your volume decreases, you're not going to have peripheral perfusion, and you'll get cold pretty quickly. As well as in the warmth, you're going to sweat it off to keep you cool. There's more to keeping a horse hydrated, goes on, however, than simply providing him constant access to clean water. Here are some facts about equine hydration. Ensure your horse gets the water his body needs, his or hers. It's Grammarly. I use Grammarly to correct all my grammar now, and it keeps thinking that horses are inanimate objects and keeps saying it's instead of his or hers. Anyway, it goes on to say signs your horse might be dehydrated. And it says dry mucous membranes. That means when you lift the lips up and you look at the gums, they're tacky, they're dry. There should be some moisture, even in your lips right now. If you move your tongue around, you're going to find that things are moist in there. And that's normal hydration. Second is poor skin elasticity. And this is where you go up with your fingers and pinch a little bit of skin, usually on the neck, just ahead of the shoulders, and it tense up, and it should immediately spring back to the normal configuration. If you tent it up and it stays there and takes 1 or 2 or 3 seconds to go back down to being flat with the skin, that is poor hydration. Slow capillary refill time means when you press your thumb against the gums and you blanch out the blood, you're pressing the blood out of that area, and you pull your finger away, the white area that's underneath your thumb should immediately become pink again. And that shows that you have good volume. But also, these things can occur in any sorts of shock where fluid is being shunted from the periphery to the core, and it mimics dehydration. Elevated heart rate. You've got other problems if you got elevated heart rate besides just dehydration. Decreased digestive function or reduced manure. I would say that it's not just reduced, but it becomes dry and firm. So when the balls hit the ground, they don't break open in a nice, flaky, moist ball. I know this is disgusting, but we're horse people, right? So we're able to take this stuff. But it drops as hard road apples. That's the best way I can describe it. Then it says sunken eyes. Yeah, if the eyes are sunk in, you're in big trouble. And tucked up abdomen, you're also in big trouble. These are signs of so many other things that are going on with your horse that you might want to consider another diagnosis besides dehydration. But they want to be complete and add all these things in here. And dehydration can occur from shock pretty quickly. Okay, it then goes on. A horse's vital signs will begin to change when he's 4 to 6% dehydrated. Visible signs such as sunken eyes and a tucked up abdomen can appear when dehydration levels approach 8 to 10%. So there again, if your horse is in serious health, whether it's just lack of water or he's got colic or other disease process, you're going to get that dehydration of mucous membranes and eye sunken, etc. So it's all a scale, like from bright to dim of a light bulb. Bright is good hydration, dim is poor hydration. You can get these various signs coming in along the way. All right. It says provide fresh, clean, palatable water at all times. I've always said this, yet a friend of mine said that her horses prefer to drink out of a concrete water tub that she has that has algae in it. It has green things growing on the side. The water still is very clear. There might even be fish swimming in it, but the horses don't mind that. It's got some constant flow, so fresh water's coming in and it's always draining. But if she cleans that concrete tub and gets all the green out of there and puts fresh water in, the horses walk away from it. They don't want it. They prefer the algae growing water. And I think that's really interesting because we spend so much time trying to clear our water buckets and clean them and make them pristine. And I agree. If you've got stagnant water, you want a clean receptacle in it. But if you've got moving water, it's going to grow some other things in there. And there's nothing to say that that's bad for a horse. Now, when we started to get, like, there was just this threat of a railroad strike here in America. And they're worried that railroads move all the chlorine, and chlorine is used to chlorinate the water and to sterilize it. So we drink sterile water. Well, there's no doubt that having hydrogen and oxygen put together in a sterile environment, like when you buy bottled water that has been taken from any source and put through distilling, and you get this pure water that comes out of it, that's distilled water is pure water, and there's nothing wrong with that. That drives the processes. But I think that there's other things in water, such as minerals, that should be taken into account. And some of these other factors that I'm not sure if I'm clear enough to say what they are, but they add taste, they add value to the water. So a nice clean spring of water is going to have minerals, it's going to have taste, it's going to have some organic elements that might even be alive, such as algae, that are actually helping the horse. I mean, there's a lot of people who have no problem adding some sort of algae like spirulina or some sort of algae to their food of the horses, and yet they scrub their water buckets super clean. Whereas a good artesian well might be the best thing for your horse and covers both bases. So that's just something to think about when it comes to water. Yes, clean your water buckets, especially if they, dump their manure in there, which a lot of horses do. They back up and just dump it in. You want to have some clean, fresh water if you're feeding out of a bucket. But if there's molds growing into it and you have water coming through, like we have a Nelson waterer, which is an automatic waterer, and we keep it outside, and the water is constantly pouring in as the horse drinks. It has fresh water being pumped from the ground, and it'll start to get this green slime around there, which we clean out every once in a while. But the horses actually love drinking out of it, and they never stop drinking when it's out there. So it's just something to think about. Okay, it goes on to say feeding mashes. And the mash is basically whatever you're feeding them, usually some sort of bran, wheat bran with water, or grain with water, or even hay cubes with water. You're going to add water in their food, so you're increasing that. That's always good, especially in the fall. If you want to add some water, some hay cubes to force them to drink water. If they're hungry, they're going to get their water intake. I think that's a really good way to get water in them when things get cooler, and keeps their manure going through. I think as good horsemen, we need to look at the manure all the time. And I was talking to a friend the other day who was talking about humans. That's all he was talking about. He doesn't know anything about horses. He says the one thing humans should learn to do more often is to look at their manure. I just kind of chuckled, because that's what we horsemen do all the time. We're looking at the output to make sure that it's normal, because that's a really good factor. You're in there mucking your stalls, but are you paying attention? Has it gotten too dry? Is it too moist and now it looks like diarrhea? What's going on? But a good, solid, normal fecal ball is going to have some water in it, and be of normal consistency. Learn what that is for your horses, and know that if it's abnormal, you should change things. And hydration, making sure they have water, will help the dehydrated, very dry fecal ball that you will notice. Then they say adding a palatable flavor, particularly before or when traveling. And that's interesting, because it's been well known that if you take powdered Gatorade and add it to the water, that adds a sweetness to it and a saltiness to it that horses like. And that will help if your horse is traveling and refuses to want water when they go. Like, you take them from one barn to a show or to another barn, and they have a different water system. Some horses can back off their water pretty quickly. And if you train them to drink some Gatorade powdered, or some electrolyte that has some glucose in it, that can help them over this hump. And don't do it permanently, because we know what excess glucose does to horses. But you can do it as an aid for some of these horses that are traveling, just to make sure they keep drinking, because hydration is really important. Then it says provide salt to trigger the thirst response. Well, salt should always be available in the form of a block and in the form of a mined salt, not just salt, NaCl, sodium chloride, but a mineral block that has that's been mined from the ground. Not the mineral blocks that are red, that have molasses and corn syrup added. We don't want that, because that's just sugar again. They're also known as sweet licks. You don't want that. You want just a block of salt that's been mined out of the ground, that has all the trace minerals, and then you hang it and allow them to have access to it. Now, some people like to add salt to water, and I've discussed this in the past, salt to their food. And some people have suggested that this is something they like to do. But as I've said in the past, it's been shown in humans and in rodents that excess salt being taken in before you're hydrated, let me rephrase that, when you are dehydrated and you take a salt load, does that make sense? In other words, you go to McDonald's and you grab the salted French fries and you down them, and then once you eat them and you start to feel thirsty, then you go for your soda and you start drinking. That is eating salt before you're hydrated. And if you put salt in food in the horse and let them come in and start eating that, and then they go over and start drinking water, I'm suggesting that there is a possibility that they will trigger an event that will convert glucose into fructose. And this may not make any sense to you if you're hearing me for the first time, but I've had podcasts on this. Fructose is another sugar that is available in sweet fruits when they are ripe. That's what creates the sugary taste. And in fact, if you use granular sugar, 50% of that is going to be fructose. And what we found in humans and in laboratory animals, fructose can go into the Krebs cycle, which is what converts the fuel into energy inside our cells. And they can spew off something called uric acid. And uric acid causes high blood pressure in humans and in rodents. It also causes a decreased insulin production, as it does in rodents and humans. And if that's true, could it possibly be occurring in our horses? I don't think anybody's ever looked at that, but uric acid can lead to this inflammation. And by extrapolation, we know that high sugar content foods can take a horse and make them laminitic. But more importantly, green spring grass, which is high in fructose, can also cause inflammation. Pardon me. The spring green grass can create fructose in the form of fructans, and if that goes in as a primary fuel, it could also spur off some uric acid, and from that could lead to inflammation of the capillaries inside the hoof and cause laminitis. This is all hypothesis. There's no proof behind it, but we all know that green grass can cause inflammation and laminitis in horses. And why risk adding salt to horse feed? Because this might occur in some horses. So that was a long-winded explanation of why I don't add salt to horse feed, but you should have it as a salt block, and that should trigger hydration. But whenever you trigger hydration using salt, you could turn glucose into fructose. So salt should be available at all time, and not just when you're trying to get a horse to drink. It should be part of its normal everyday routine, and the horse will decide whether he wants to drink first and then have some salt, or vice versa. So I recommend mine salt in blocks. Then it says supplementing with electrolytes. The same thing, you're adding electrolytes, which is basically sodium and chloride, as well as potassium and other what am I thinking of? Elements that are in electrolyte form. So they've gained or lost an electron. So if you're putting in some of these salts into the food and you're making it salty, and they eat this and then go over and drink, you may be triggering this reaction. And of course, if your horse is normal weight, it's going to be transitory and you don't have to worry about it. But you shouldn't be adding electrolytes. That's just the way I look at it. If they're drinking water and eating salt, and the water has all the minerals in it, why bother adding electrolytes? With one exception, if your horse is working hard and is sweating a lot, yes, add some electrolytes, but make sure they're hydrated first. Make sure they drink water first before you eat the electrolytes. I'm just saying it's a hypothesis, but I'm going to stick with it until somebody comes along and says, that's just impossible in a horse. The last thing they say is ensuring water is not too cold in winter. This is the biggest piece of advice you could get. If you've got winter weather coming, and it is coming for a lot of us in the next couple of months, if you could heat the water. And the best way to heat the water, if you've got a stock tank, meaning you're outside, you've got a big tub of water that has 100 gallons or something in there. And the best way I found to heat it is to put in a propane-driven stock tank heater. They look like the boot that you've got on your foot. It's like long and tall with an extension. And in this long, tall, round, vertical post is the element that ignites and creates a flame. And that's attached to a propane tank that's outside the pasture where the horses can't get to it. And I remember heating the water that we had when we were in upstate New York. And that was so crazy, because the flame would come on, you'd hear it roaring. It was not huge roar, but like a distant railroad train going through. And it would heat the water. So you could see vapor coming off of it when it was like below freezing outside. And these horses would drink that tank dry all winter long. And it was mandatory. We went out, check it every day to make sure it had enough water, so the heating element was covered. But it's a really slick thing. It's no different than the heating element if you've got a gas-powered hot water heater in your house. You've got a propane tank. It comes in, and this flame, it's got a pilot light, and then it ignites when the thermostat says it needs to be warmed up. These things work beautifully, and I've yet to see anybody in the horse world own one. It's just a no-brainer for me. But alternative to that, you could use an electric stock tank heater, and those work too. I just find that the propane was so much easier, and the tank was just delivered by our propane company. And then in the springtime, they took the tank back, and then they brought it back in the winter. So you just used it during that time. And I think it was cost effective. And we, knock on wood, we never had any colic problems due to dehydration on our farm. So that's all I have to say about water consumption in this magazine. There's just so much. I just love reading magazines and understanding their here we go. There are advertisements. So the advertisement on the back of this obviously was from Purina because they sponsored it. And it says, our Purina PhD nutritionists tackle problems using science. And we both know that science in nutrition is variable. And I'll spend a little bit time on that, but let me just keep reading. And our love of horses keeps us at it until we get it right. Even with our most established feeds, we keep innovating. Even when it takes years of research, we don't stop until it's right, on and on and on. But what I thought was interesting is it says science right there, science plus love, helping horses thrive. And I thought that was interesting because I've been using the tagline, helping horses thrive in the human world, for years. And I'm just wondering if that was just taken out of the blue, or if Purina realizes that they're encroaching on something that I've been saying for years, helping horses thrive in a human world. And I've put a TM mark after it in several places. And they might just be saying, well, that's a really catchy phrase, so let's see if we can steal it. No problem, Purina. I think we're all trying to help horses thrive in a human world. And I think that that's great. And we should, but I'm not sure if feeding grain is the right way to go. But let me talk about the science in using nutritionists to tackle problems using science. There are a lot of really good nutritionists out there. These are scientists who believe in what they're doing. They use analytical approach to create science. But if you look at the science of nutrition, just historically in humans, you're going to probably want to temper your belief in it. For instance, in the 50s and 60s, we were told that a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet is the best. And since then, cardiovascular disease has just increased tremendously in humans. We've been told that calories in, calories out, using thermodynamics, the law of thermodynamics, is the be-all and end-all. And then other people come in and say, no, it has nothing to do with thermodynamics, that it's not calories in, calories out. It's all about hormones. And then you have those of us who believe that it's a combination of both. Then add on top of that, you have genetics. You have Eskimos who don't have access to a lot of food other than what they fish out of the ocean. And then, of course, you have islanders in the Pacific who have nothing but fruit available. And we find that the diets and our ability to digest them are all different. So here they're taking horses and they're keeping them in a stall confinement, or maybe a pasture stall relationship, and they're domesticated and they're treated like scientific animals, just like the rats in the cages in our laboratories, or dogs, beagles, any sort of lab animal, even fruit flies. and other yeast cultures. They're all kept in labs, and they're not allowed to live in a normal, natural environment. And you keep your horse also in a controlled environment. Your horse doesn't have to fend off from predators. It doesn't have to migrate and find multiple sources of food to get the base of protein. It basically is given the monograss of your pasture and the monograss of the hay that you're giving them. And we have adulterated evolution in the development of the way the horses were supposed to eat. And we're just making it convenient. It's so convenient to fence in a pasture and turn the horse out there, and knowing that whenever you go out to the pasture, the horse is going to be in that confinement. It's not going to be miles away where you have to go out and hunt for him and collect him and bring him back and spend half your day just trying to find him. We know that if we bring him into a stall and keep him in there, he's going to be there the next day. We know that it's convenient to buy a bag of food or a bale of hay, and it's all for our convenience. There's a book. What was it called? It's such a good book. His last name is Apple. I just know that, and it's all about the luxury of how we live these days. And we've brought this to our horses. In fact, if you look at the advent of grain coming into our lives about 12 or 10,000 years ago or 8,000 years ago, depends on who you read, the idea of planting crops and harvesting them took more work on our part, but it was easier because we didn't have to constantly be going out there and looking for the stuff. We could store our grain and have it in the dead of winter. So we're storing grains for horses and having it when grain and pasture aren't available. So they don't have to have this natural ebb and flow. They have this lap of luxury, if you will. They live inside a stall. They have fans on them. The flies aren't there. They don't have predators because they're protected by a wall. They don't have the social interaction of bullies. They can hide and be away from it all. And they're fed what you tell them they're supposed to eat. So all these nutritionists are coming out looking at horses in that way. And I won't say they're disrespecting evolution. I just don't think that they're taking into account all the evolutionary changes that occurred in the tens of thousands, if not millions of years up to their domestication. And once it became domesticated, we started to alter everything. And that includes their water consumption, where they're only given a bucket of water. And by golly, it's dry in the afternoon. Well, I'll add some water. But they didn't have access to drink water until they were satiated, or have the minerals or the protein. And one of the things that this podcast I listened to is talking about protein, which I found absolutely fascinating, is in humans, they now realize, I mean, there's enough scientific evidence that we should be aiming for 1 gram per pound of body weight, which is really hard to do, and exercise to build the muscle. Otherwise, these proteins can cause some adverse results in humans, specifically methionine. And methionine is one of the amino acids that has sulfur in it. And I've been preaching for years that you need methionine in the diet to create disulfide bonds that add strength to the keratin, which is the hoof. And everybody who puts their horse on soybean meal, which has got, I'd say, ample amounts of methionine in it, are seeing the results in better hoof growth in 2 to 4 months and completely new hooves in 1 year to 2 years, and laminitis being resolved, which is just fantastic news. They also decrease glucose down to a minimum. But adding strength to the hoof is so important for a horse, and adding strength to the hair, which is also methionine or keratin. You'll see the hair coat improve in less than a month, some of these horses, and the skin will come along in about 1 year. So the proteins are so important, and methionine is so important, but excess methionine can lead to methylation and possibly shorten the life of whoever's eating it, human or horse. But if you couple that with exercise, so the horse is moving around, he's grazing, or you're using them for work, the exercise along with 1 gram per pound of body weight together gives the ideal combination for longevity. So if you want your horse to hang around for a long time, get the protein levels up and add some exercise, and you'll be amazed at the response. So now I've brought you up to date. Again, I want to apologize for my delay in getting this podcast out, but I read to you one article out of this horse magazine that I thought was important about water. I've touched on electrolytes, I've touched upon salt and fructose, and I've touched upon protein. So it goes back to all that. But don't forget the rest of the horse's body, like its teeth. You know me, I'm big on teeth and horses. So I'm going to do what I can to give you some more information on dentistry in horses. There's other articles in here about joint injections and, of course, the microbiome, which I'm going to touch on in the next couple of podcasts to bring to you a different take on what's being presented to you, so you have a balanced way. And I also encourage cognitive thinking, which is opposed to cognitive laziness, which I wrote a whole blog about, which means that you just accept everything that's given to you. You don't take the time to sit there and look at it and understand it and dig deep and ask questions. And if you have any questions about this, please be sure to let me know. If you're a member of the Horses Advocate, we're having Ask Me Anything, or what I call AMAs, where you can ask these questions and put me on the spot and see if I can come up with common sense solutions or help you clarify things. And of course, becoming a member of the Horses Advocate also allows you to join our focus topics that we have once a month, which cover everything about horse care and horse ownership. So please consider becoming a member of the Horses Advocate, and you can do that at thehorsesadvocate.com. Just click on the membership button and sign in. That'll help things. So again, I'm grateful for all of you being here. I'm grateful for you sticking with me as time goes on and life deals things that curveballs, I call them, if you're into baseball. And I look forward to talking with you the next time around. Thanks, Doc T out. Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's 2 reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.